Cops ignore black woman's pleas, shocked when the judge recognizes her as a U.S. attorney. Alyssa Jenkins eased her car onto the shoulder of a dimly lit street, heart pounding with alarm. She'd spotted a teenage girl, trembling and hunched in distress against a broken street lamp. Urgency flooded Alyssa's thoughts. She was no bystander, but a dedicated U.S. attorney known for her unwavering stand on civil rights. Without hesitation, she approached the frightened teenager, only to find her pleas ignored when a pair of police cruisers arrived. Their flashing lights illuminated a gross misunderstanding, one that painted Alyssa herself as a criminal. Little did these officers know that their target for harassment was the very attorney sworn to uphold federal justice. The day began much like any other for Alyssa Jenkins, a 34-year-old U.S. attorney with the Northern District of California, specifically operating out of the Redwood City branch of the U.S. District Court. She was known among her peers and adversaries alike for her meticulousness and fierce commitment to civil rights. Her office shelves were lined with thick binders, detailing various litigation's excessive force cases, civil rights violations, housing discrimination suits, and more. She had been at the forefront of multiple high-profile prosecutions against powerful agencies. Those who worked with her admired her clarity of purpose, while some of her adversaries privately respected, if not feared, her ability to build an unassailable case. That particular morning, Alyssa had risen early as usual, her mind already humming with thoughts about an upcoming hearing. She prepared a new motion in a case against a private prison contractor accused of racial discrimination in hiring. Legal strategies danced in her head as she slipped into a crisp, black blazer, pinned her curly hair into a low bun, and stepped into her sensible heels. Throughout the day, she juggled calls from potential witnesses and hammered out the last details in her opening statement. Her colleagues were used to seeing her pacing behind her desk, reciting lines of argument in a low mutter. The final exchange of documents concluded near the close of business. Feeling that familiar hum of satisfaction after a productive day, Alyssa packed up her briefcase. She intended to head home, possibly treat herself to a night in with a good book. As she drove down Magnolia Drive, a broad street stretching through a quieter suburban area near Redwood City, her mind drifted to the case's complexities. That's when she noticed a figure by the roadside. Initially, the darkness obscured whether it was a child or an adult. Slowing her vehicle, she realized with a jolt that it was a teenage girl, no older than 15 or 16, standing alone under a malfunctioning streetlight. The teen's posture radiated fear and desperation. Alyssa's first instinct was caution. She'd dealt with tense street encounters before, and she had been raised to be vigilant, especially after dark. Still, concern outweighed caution. With a soft sigh, she eased her car onto the shoulder. She lowered her window and called gently, "Are you all right? Do you need help?" The girl's reply was halting. She said her name was Brianna, voice quivering as she admitted that she had run away from an unsafe home environment. She looked unkempt, wearing a hoodie with a ragged tear along one sleeve. Her eyes flickered with an unsteady mixture of fear and defiance. Alyssa's heart constricted. She had encountered countless stories of young people trapped in dire situations during her career, but it was different seeing such vulnerability face to face in the gloom of night. She killed the engine, unfastened her seatbelt, and carefully exited the car. "Let's see how I can help," she said, softly stepping closer, hands visible and relaxed. In a frantic whisper, Brianna warned, "Don't call the cops, please don't." She trembled, eyes darting to the empty street behind Alyssa. "They always treat me like a criminal." Alyssa nodded in empathy, recalling the painful narratives of racial bias and unjust suspicion that so many youth of color faced. "I understand. We can try calling a local advocacy group Or Child Protective Services, she suggested. I just want you to be safe. Brianna's shoulders twitched in a tiny shrug of uncertain relief. For a moment, it seemed the tension in her jaw loosened, but the moment didn't last. Before either of them could relax, the night was split by the glare of headlights, followed quickly by the swirling red and blue glow of a police cruiser. And then another. 2 cars crawling to a stop, shining harsh beams onto Alyssa and the teen. Alyssa felt her stomach lurch. Help had arrived, but not in the way Brianna wanted. As 2 officers emerged, their faces set in stern lines, Alyssa instinctively raised her hands waist-high, trying to convey that she posed no threat. She called out, "Officers, it's okay. I'm just step away from the minor," barked the taller officer, whose name badge read Dawson. He had a commanding presence, broad-shouldered, with a sharp jaw clenched tight. The second cop, shorter and stockier, with the name Cooper, glared at Brianna. "What's going on here? Why are you out on the street?" Brianna glanced at Alyssa, terrified, then back to the officers. I was. Alyssa tried again, using the calm, measured tone she'd perfected in the courtroom. "Officers, my name is Alyssa Jenkins." Ma'am, place your hands on the hood of your vehicle," Dawson barked. He shone his flashlight into her face. Alyssa froze. The harshness in his voice triggered alarm bells in her mind. She had spent enough time scrutinizing law enforcement practices to know that a situation could escalate in seconds. She noticed that Cooper's hand hovered near his sidearm. She resolved to cooperate, not wanting the slightest misunderstanding to spiral out of control. With deliberate care, she set her palms on the hood. Her pulse hammered, an odd mixture of fear and indignation swirling inside her. "I'm not resisting," she said quietly. "I'm an attorney with the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Northern District of California. Let me get my identification, please." Dawson barely acknowledged her words. He stepped forward, pressing her forearm flat to the hood more forcefully than necessary. "We'll see about that," he muttered. Then he jerked his chin at Cooper. "Check the girl." Brianna shrank back. "I didn't do anything wrong. Up against the car," Cooper snapped, roughly guiding her to Alyssa's vehicle. Alyssa winced at Brianna's cry of alarm. Anger flared in Alyssa's chest. They hadn't even given her a chance to explain. They were treating both her and Brianna like criminals, like objects to be subdued first, questioned later. In clipped, urgent sentences, Alyssa tried again. "Officers, she's a minor in crisis." I stopped to help her. I have her best interests. The glare of the flashlight cut her off, stabbing into her eyes, momentarily blinding her. Dawson repeated, "Put your ID on the hood." Slowly. Shaken, Alyssa moved one hand, aware that any sudden movement might provoke him further. "This is my U.S. Attorney ID," she said pointedly. "Please verify it." As she slid the slim leather case onto the hood, Cooper flicked a glance over from where he was patting down Brianna. Dawson snatched up the case, opened it for a moment, then tossed it aside. "Anyone can have a fancy badge," he sneered. Alyssa's mouth dropped in shock at such blatant disregard. "That's a federal credential," she said firmly, her own voice tight with rising frustration. "Call it in. You'll see." "Keep quiet, lady," Dawson warned. "We'll handle things here. Don't you try to big shot us." In that instant, Alyssa understood with crystalline clarity. These officers either don't care who I am, or they're deliberately ignoring it. She felt a surge of helpless fury. Here she was, a federal prosecutor who had dedicated her career to upholding justice, pinned to her own car as though she was a threat. Her heart broke for Brianna, who had likely endured this brand of suspicion her entire life. Brianna let out a stifled whimper when Cooper finished patting her down. Dawson then glared at Alyssa. "I'm detaining you both for questioning. If you resist, you'll be under arrest, got that?" Alyssa swallowed hard, steadying her shaking voice. "I will comply. But you need to know that once this is sorted out, I will report." Dawson pinned her arms behind her back as though she were physically resisting, ignoring that she stood almost perfectly still. Pain jarred her shoulders, and she felt the cold slap of handcuffs on her wrists. The metallic click reverberated through her eyes locked on Brianna, whose face shone with tears. The teen was also cuffed and trembling. Even in that horrifying moment, Alyssa's protective instincts rose. She forced herself to maintain composure. For Brianna's sake, she had to show calm, rational leadership. Inside, though, a hurricane of anger and betrayal raged. This was the system I served, she thought. I gave it my all. And now it's slamming me into the hood of a car without cause. One more attempt, her voice low and tight. "You're making a big mistake, Officer Dawson." His only response was to propel her toward the back seat of the cruiser, ignoring every word. Cooper ushered Brianna into the second car, slamming the door behind her. The quiet street fell back into shadows, with only the swirling red and blue to keep silent vigil. Little did the officers realize that their show of aggression would soon unravel their careers. The moment Alyssa's handcuffs were removed inside the station, a wave of dull pain radiated across her wrists. She massaged them gingerly, swallowing her anger. The booking room smelled like stale coffee and disinfectant, its fluorescent lights washing everything in a sickly glow. Brianna was ushered away from her. Alyssa could only hope the teen wouldn't be left traumatized by more heavy-handed treatment. Alyssa watched as an officer behind the booking desk took her ID and personal belongings. One of the station staff, Officer Reynolds, furrowed his brow as he scanned the U.S. attorney credential. "Wait, this is legit," he murmured, flipping it over. He lifted his gaze to Alyssa, perplexed. "Ma'am, are you truly a federal attorney?" "Yes," Alyssa said, mustering as much civility as she could manage. "Please verify it through official channels." She glanced around in search of Sergeant Dawson or Officer Cooper, but neither was in sight. Likely they were completing their own report or gloating about their catch. Reynolds placed a call to a superior, stepping aside for a moment. When he returned, he avoided eye contact with Alyssa. "I'm not sure what's going on," he stammered, "but I've been told to continue processing you." Alyssa felt frustration spike. She had rung the alarm, but the system was apparently doubling down. "They're going to keep me here until they figure out some excuse." That was what her gut told her. Her frustration mingled with concern. What about Brianna? Will they just throw her in juvenile lockup? She steeled herself for a night in the holding cell. There was no point in arguing with the booking officer. She needed legal representation. She knew enough from years in the justice system that if the precinct was determined to hold her, she wasn't likely to talk her way out quickly. At least she had the advantage of knowledge. She understood Miranda rights, bail hearings, booking procedures. The cell she was placed in was Spartan, with concrete walls and a narrow bench bolted to the floor. Another detainee sat in one corner, face buried in his arms. A flickering overhead light added to the bleak atmosphere. Alyssa settled onto the bench, breathing deeply to quell the tremors in her limbs. She had never, ever wanted to end up behind bars, especially not under false pretenses. Yet here she was. Time passed slowly, each minute stretching into an eternity. She replayed the events in her mind, searching for any detail that might help her unravel how to best handle the aftermath. She had recognized a few legal missteps by the officers, refusing to acknowledge her ID, using cuffs without probable cause, ignoring the mention of child protection for Brianna. There was no shortage of grounds for a complaint, but for the moment, that knowledge offered little comfort. Alyssa's face burned with humiliation at the memory of a cell door clanging behind her. The fear she'd seen in Brianna's eyes refused to leave her thoughts. At one point, a female officer arrived to take Alyssa's fingerprints. She looked vaguely uncomfortable, as though she was aware something was amiss. When she finished, she cleared her throat. "You can make a phone call now, if you'd like," she said, her gaze not quite meeting Alyssa's. "Thank you." Alyssa's voice was taut. She rose, following the officer to a small phone in the corridor. She dialed the number of her mentor, Assistant U.S. Attorney Cassandra Green, an unflinching woman in her 50s who had guided Alyssa through the labyrinth of federal prosecution since her first day. Cassandra answered after a few rings, voice thick with fatigue and worry. "Alyssa, it's nearly midnight. Is everything—" "I'm in custody," Alyssa blurted softly. The humiliating statement choked in her throat. "Wrongful arrest. Redwood City Police. They wouldn't look at my ID, wouldn't hear me out. They cuffed me after I stopped to help a runaway teen." "Oh my God," Cassandra said, voice frigid with anger. "Sit tight. Don't say another word to them. I'll get there as soon as I can. Did they give you a reason?" "Charges. They're calling it resisting arrest. Something about interfering with an investigation." "It's nonsense," Alyssa muttered, her eyes flitting around the corridor. "But they're not budging." Cassandra's next words were resolute. "I'll call the on-duty DA. See if we can expedite this. Don't lose your temper. Don't sign anything until I arrive." Alyssa felt a flood of relief. If anyone could peel back the layers of bureaucratic stonewalling, it was Cassandra. "Thank you," she murmured before disconnecting. She was led back to the cell. The hours crawled by. A swirl of internal questions hammered at her thoughts. Would they try to deny that she was truly a federal attorney? Could Dawson manipulate the reports? Would Brianna be safe? The teen's terrified face hovered in Alyssa's mind. Anger smoldered. She had prosecuted law enforcement officers before for civil rights violations. She was intimately familiar with how systemic biases and local power structures could bury complaints. Was that the fate that awaited Brianna, or herself? Finally, near dawn, an officer came to fetch her. "You have a visitor," he said curtly. Alyssa followed him out, eyes burning from lack of sleep. She was taken to a cramped interview room where Cassandra waited, silver hair pinned back, wearing a crisp grey suit that showed she had come directly from bed to the station with no time to change. Her face was a mask of professional fury. "Miss Jenkins, you're being placed before the judge for a bail hearing this morning," the officer told her, ignoring Cassandra's presence. "You'll be transported soon." Cassandra gave a tight nod, placing a reassuring hand on Alyssa's shoulder. "I talked to the department's watch commander. They're not dropping the charges. They claim you resisted, but I have the phone logs. You called for help for a minor. You tried to identify yourself. This is outrageous." Alyssa's jaw tensed, and the teen— "Do we know anything about Brianna?" Cassandra exhaled. "She's in juvenile holding, apparently. They say they'll have Child Protective Services review her status." Alyssa closed her eyes, a wave of concern rippling through her. She resolved that once her own legal entanglement was cleared, she'd do everything possible to ensure Brianna's safety. Just a few more hours, she told herself, clinging to the knowledge that justice tends to come with evidence and the truth on its side. She had both in abundance. With the sun's morning light streaming through the windows of the Redwood City courthouse, Alyssa was escorted into an arraignment chamber. The judge presiding was a no-nonsense figure, the Honorable Sylvia Kwan, who had once encountered Alyssa in passing at a legal conference on civil rights litigation. However, this was their first time meeting on opposing sides of the bench. Rows of seats behind the bar were filled with a mix of other detainees awaiting their hearing. Tension braided through the air. Cassandra stood at the defense table, posture rigid with indignation. Alyssa joined her, scanning the space. She noticed Sergeant Dawson and Officer Cooper near the front, wearing their uniforms and stoic expressions. She felt a jolt of fury at their brazen confidence. "All rise," the bailiff intoned. Judge Kwan stepped up to the bench, adjusting her glasses. After a quick run-through of the docket, she called People v. Jenkins resisting arrest, obstructing justice, interfering in a minor's case. Are we prepared to proceed? The prosecutor from the district attorney's office, a woman named Karen Lowe, approached. Alyssa noticed the slight tremor in Lowe's hands as she glanced at the police reports. Something in the way the DA's attorney avoided eye contact with Alyssa spoke volumes. Perhaps she sensed that the charges were shaky. Cassandra addressed the court. Your Honor, this is an egregious situation. My client, Alyssa Jenkins, is a U.S. attorney. She was arrested under false pretenses for allegedly resisting arrest and obstruction. In fact, Miss Jenkins stopped to aid a minor in distress. She repeatedly presented her federal credentials, which the officers ignored. The child in question, Brianna, was forcibly detained without cause or hearing. This entire fiasco is a travesty. Judge Kwan's eyebrows rose in mild surprise. Miss Jenkins, you're with the Northern District of California, correct? Alyssa, feeling a small flutter of hope, nodded. Yes, Your Honor. Sergeant Dawson, standing next to Officer Cooper, cleared his throat. Your Honor, the defendant failed to comply with lawful commands. She tried to obstruct our investigation into the status of a runaway minor. She brandished a badge, but we have reason to believe it wasn't genuine. She also physically resisted. He was cut off by Cassandra's clipped retort. We have body cam footage, Your Honor, that clearly contradicts these assertions. Furthermore, Miss Jenkins's credentials are indeed genuine. I request immediate release and dismissal. The judge's gaze sharpened. She glanced at the prosecutor. Miss Lowe, have you reviewed this footage? Are there grounds for the charges? Lowe looked flustered. Your Honor, I only received partial evidence. The Redwood City Police provided statements claiming Miss Jenkins was aggressive, but I have not seen the footage yet. We would request a continuance to gather more evidence. Cassandra shook her head fiercely. My client is a federal prosecutor. She was detained overnight. There is no probable cause to hold her any longer. Dawson opened his mouth to protest, but Judge Kwan lifted a hand. Sergeant, let the court evaluate the evidence. Miss Lowe, I'm ordering the release of Miss Jenkins on her own recognizance, pending a full review of the body cam footage. The charges remain, for now, until we have clarity. But I see no reason to hold Miss Jenkins in custody. A wave of relief washed over Alyssa. She allowed herself a slight nod, ignoring the rigid scowl on Dawson's face. She had no illusions, however. This was not the end. The charges still hung over her, and Brianna remained in the system, vulnerable. Still, it was the first real sign that justice might prevail. As she left the courthouse, media cameras flashed. Word had already leaked that a U.S. attorney had been arrested. Journalists surged forward, firing questions. Cassandra, ever the seasoned figure, guided Alyssa away, repeating, "No comment at this time." In the swirling frenzy of microphones and flashbulbs, Alyssa caught sight of Dawson's hawk-like stare. It was a stare that promised he would not back down easily. She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze head-on. You've awakened the wrong fight, Sergeant, she thought. I have the law on my side, and I won't stop until the truth comes out. After the turbulence of the arraignment, Alyssa returned to her apartment, physically free yet emotionally bound by anger. Her place was modest, a living area lined with shelves of law books and historical biographies, a small but functional kitchen, and a tiny balcony that overlooked a row of palm trees. She tossed her keys onto the kitchen counter and took a moment to press her palms to her eyes, forcing steady breaths to calm her racing mind. Memories of her upbringing in a predominantly black neighborhood in Oakland flooded back. She recalled her parents' warnings. Don't give the police any reason to suspect you. Keep your hands visible. Don't talk back. As a child, she'd struggled to comprehend why her father, a history teacher, flinched at the sound of sirens. In law school, she naively believed that acquiring knowledge of the system would insulate her from such experiences. I should have known better, she thought bitterly. Slumping onto her couch, she checked her phone. Messages and missed calls rolled in from concerned friends, colleagues, even some distant relatives who had seen preliminary news stories. Carefully, she typed out a short text to her closest circle. "I'm out now. False charges, fighting them. Will update soon." She refused to let the fiasco define her, but she had to acknowledge the seriousness of the situation. Alyssa's gaze drifted to a framed photograph on her shelf, her graduating class at UC Berkeley School of Law. She'd entered that place with a fervent dream, using her knowledge to fix the inequalities that had plagued her community. She'd never forget the civil rights courses that spurred her to apply for a position in the Point Use Attorney's office. Yet here she was, ironically forced to defend herself against the very system she'd sworn to uphold. She recalled a conversation from years ago with Cassandra Green, who warned that certain police departments harbored pockets of entrenched bias. "You're going to walk into court with righteousness in your heart," Cassandra had said. But remember that these institutions don't topple easily. The old guard will do anything to protect their own. Alyssa had believed it in an abstract sense. Now she felt the truth, like a punch to the gut. Swallowing the lump in her throat, she pulled out her laptop and opened a new file, Incident Report Arrest of Alyssa Jenkins. She began typing a thorough account of the events on Magnolia Drive, determined to document every detail while it was still fresh. She described Brianna's frantic state, the officers' immediate hostility, their refusal to verify Alyssa's credentials, the rough handling, and the sense that she'd been racially profiled. At certain points, her hands trembled on the keyboard. She forced herself to keep going. She needed a flawless account, not only to defend herself, but to build a potential civil rights lawsuit if the department persisted in trying to smear her name. Part of her also hoped that her thoroughness would shed light on how these officers might have treated countless others in Redwood City. "I'm not the first, and I won't be the last," she mused. "But maybe I can help ensure that they don't do this again." When she finished, over 2 hours had passed. She rubbed her eyes, scanning the text with a fierce sense of purpose. Her phone chirped with an incoming call. Cassandra again. "Time to strategize," she answered, and Cassandra wasted no pleasantries. "We've got a date with the Redwood City Police Department's internal affairs tomorrow. They want a statement from you about the officer's conduct." "Good," Alyssa said, setting her jaw. "I'll also be filing a formal complaint. Are you coming?" "Of course," Cassandra replied. "I've alerted a couple of our colleagues and the local chapter of the ACLU. If the department tries to downplay your complaint, we'll escalate." Alyssa nodded absently. "They can't bury this. They humiliated me, but that's minor compared to what they might be doing to vulnerable people every day." She could practically sense Cassandra's approving smile through the phone. "That's what I admire about you, Alyssa. You're still thinking of the bigger picture." After they hung up, Alyssa powered down her laptop, feeling a faint surge of determination. She suspected that being a U.S. attorney might give her a slight edge in seeking justice, but her empathy lay with those whose voices were never heard. If she had to shake up the Redwood City Police Department to ensure accountability, she was more than ready. At 9 the next morning, Alyssa and Cassandra arrived at Redwood City PD's headquarters. The building was an imposing structure of steel and glass, fronted by carefully manicured hedges. Within its walls, countless decisions were made daily that shaped the fates of residents, many of whom had no idea what truly occurred behind closed doors. As Alyssa stepped into the lobby, she felt every gaze flick toward her. She recognized some faces from the previous night desk officers who had handled her booking, staff who had typed up reports. Even the security guard looked uneasy. Cassandra breezed past them, heading straight for the Internal Affairs unit. A middle-aged man with thinning hair greeted them in a small conference room. "I'm Captain Ramirez, head of Internal Affairs. Please have a seat." His tone was polite yet guarded. The room was plain. A long wooden table, a few chairs, a water cooler in one corner. A large shield emblem of Redwood City PD dominated one wall. Cassandra introduced herself and handed over a file with Alyssa's statement. "We trust you'll take this complaint seriously, Captain. Miss Jenkins was wrongly arrested despite presenting valid federal ID." Ramirez's lips pressed into a thin line. "We investigate all misconduct complaints thoroughly." He turned to Alyssa. "I've read the preliminary incident report. Sergeant Dawson claims you refused to identify yourself properly, that you interfered with a police inquiry of a runaway, and that you resisted." Alyssa stared him down, unwavering. "That's categorically false. I identified myself immediately, tried to retrieve my badge calmly, and explained that the team was in crisis. Dawson and Cooper escalated the situation." Ramirez nodded, scribbling notes. "We have some body cam footage, but Dawson's camera was partially obscured. Officer Cooper's camera, however, might be more revealing. We're reviewing it now." Alyssa cut in. Why was Dawson's footage obscured? She could guess at the answer: convenient malfunction. She'd heard that line before in lawsuits. Ramirez gave a practiced shrug. Happens sometimes. Equipment issues, or the angle might not have captured everything. We can't jump to conclusions. But if your story holds up, we'll handle it accordingly. Cassandra's voice dripped with cool challenge. "Miss Jenkins is prepared to file a civil rights lawsuit if Redwood City PD fails to address these officers' conduct. You should also know that Miss Jenkins was in the process of helping a minor who might have faced abuse." Ramirez's expression flickered, revealing a glimmer of concern. "We have the minor in question under protective custody. We're evaluating her home situation. However, the department's stance is that Miss Jenkins disrupted our official procedure." Alyssa's patience strained. She inhaled, speaking slowly. "Captain, the first prosecutes civil rights violations for a living. I've never seen a scenario in which a good Samaritan is arrested so swiftly while trying to help a vulnerable teenager. The truth is, your officers ignored my credentials and pinned me to the hood without cause. That's on them." Ramirez tapped his pen nervously. "We will do our due diligence. This interview is concluded for now. We appreciate your cooperation. You'll hear from us soon." Outside in the hallway, Cassandra muttered under her breath, "Typical fence sitting. They're hedging their bets, hoping to see if there's enough public outcry to force them to act." Alyssa pressed her lips together. "They can hedge all they want. If they whitewash this, we'll push for a federal investigation. Let's see how the district attorney's office reacts once they view the footage." Just then, Alyssa's phone buzzed. She answered, voice low. The caller identified herself as Valerie Singh, a reporter with a local station. "Miss Jenkins, I'm doing a piece on alleged police misconduct. I heard rumors that you were involved. Any comment?" Alyssa hesitated. Part of her wanted to lay out the entire story, shining a spotlight on Sergeant Dawson's wrongdoing. But Cassandra's counsel earlier had been to tread carefully. "Miss Singh, thanks for reaching out," she replied. "I'm not able to comment in full detail right now, but I can confirm that there's an ongoing internal affairs investigation. I believe the facts will speak for themselves." Valerie probed. "What about the minor you tried to help?" Alyssa clenched her jaw. She knew revealing too much about Brianna's situation could backfire, violating the teen's privacy. "All I can say is that I encountered a teenager who seemed to be fleeing from a dangerous environment. My priority was ensuring her safety. I was prevented from doing so. The rest is under review. After the call ended, Cassandra gave her a nod. "Good job. That sets the record straight without giving them ammo to twist your words." Alyssa agreed, though tension persisted in her chest. She could sense that the story was gaining traction, and the Redwood City PD might soon be under a microscope. In her gut, she hoped the scrutiny would be enough to force a real reckoning. 2 days later, a swirl of rumors reached Alyssa's ears. A contact at the Redwood City courthouse, who preferred anonymity, told her that Sergeant Dawson had been the subject of prior complaints. Many were quietly dismissed by the department. Anonymous tipsters suggested that Dawson had a track record of using unnecessary force, especially against people of color. Cooper's name surfaced less frequently, indicating he was more of a follower than a leader in misconduct. Alyssa felt her anger rekindle. She had known these things could happen. Blue wall of silence, departmental politics, intimidation of complainants, but seeing it up close was maddening. She was determined to shine a spotlight on Dawson's entire record, but she needed proof. She rummaged through her mental Rolodex of contacts, recalling a detective in Redwood City PD's narcotics division, John Rooker, who had once quietly provided tips to Alyssa's office in a separate federal corruption case. She wondered if he might be willing to talk again. She left him a discreet voicemail. "Detective Rooker, this is Alyssa Jenkins from the Point U.S. Attorney's Office. Hoping to speak about a matter that may involve Sergeant Dawson. Please call." Later that night, her phone rang. Rooker's voice was cautious, almost hushed. "Miss Jenkins, I got your message." "Are you sure you want to poke that hornet's nest?" Alyssa's eyes narrowed. "I was arrested by Dawson on bogus charges and manhandled. I hear he has a track record. If you have information that could help me expose him, now's the time." Rooker was silent for a beat. Then he said, "I can't discuss details over the phone, but if you want the inside story, meet me at Vito's Diner. Tomorrow night, 7 p.m. We'll talk." Alyssa agreed, ending the call. The sense of stepping into deeper waters set her nerves on edge. She knew well that law enforcement loyalty often ran deep, and an officer going against his own could face retaliation. The fact that Rooker was willing to speak signaled that Dawson's history must be significant and possibly damning enough to justify the risk. Vito's Diner was a relic from Redwood City's past. A neon sign buzzed above the door, and inside, a handful of worn booths lined the walls. At exactly 7 p.m. Alyssa walked in, wearing casual attire so she wouldn't attract undue attention. She spotted Detective Rooker in a corner booth, nursing a cup of coffee, scanning the room warily. He waved her over. He was in his early 40s, with tired eyes and a neatly trimmed beard. He offered a curt nod as she slid into the seat opposite him. "Thanks for meeting," he said quietly, glancing over his shoulder. "I've got maybe 20 minutes before anyone realizes I'm out. Let's cut to the chase." Alyssa leaned forward. "Dawson arrested me without cause. I've heard rumors he's done this to others, maybe worse. I need evidence, official documents, or corroborating witnesses to prove his misconduct is a pattern." Rooker sipped his coffee, brow furrowed in contemplation. For years, Dawson's had a certain reputation. Folks in the department either fear him or look up to him. He's known to push legal boundaries, especially when dealing with black residents. Complaints get buried because he has connections up the chain. The police union reps always defend him. Alyssa's pulse quickened. "So the Redwood City PD leadership knows?" "Hard to say how high up it goes," Rooker replied, eyes shifting around. "But I do know he's faced half a dozen internal complaints that vanished. Victims gave up because they were harassed or threatened. Word on the street is that he learned early how to manipulate body cam footage or claim it malfunctioned. He intimidates subordinates into backing his version of events." Alyssa felt her jaw tighten. "That lines up with what happened to me. He claims my arrest was justified, but his footage is mysteriously obscured." "Cooper's footage might be the key." Rooker set his coffee down. "That's the thing. Cooper's young, impressionable. He's done Dawson's bidding, but maybe he's not fully corrupt. If you find a way to get Cooper alone, he might fold under pressure. Alyssa took note. I plan to push for a civil rights investigation. If the Department of Justice steps in, maybe more officers will come forward. But are you willing to help? The detective hesitated, glancing at the diner's exit. I'll do what I can off the record. I can't be the star witness, or they'll find a way to ruin my career, but I'll pass you some documents. Internal memos, complaint histories, enough to get you started. Alyssa exhaled, relief and resolve mixing in her chest. I appreciate it. And you should know, once this surfaces, it might cause big waves. Dawson won't go down easily. Rooker nodded grimly. He's dangerous. He hates being challenged. Be careful, Miss Jenkins. He slid a small flash drive across the table. Here's a start. I have to go. With that, he stood, tossed a few bills on the table, and left swiftly. Alyssa stared at the flash drive, heart pounding. This could be the crucial piece in dismantling Dawson's shield. But even as determination flared within her, she felt a twinge of fear. What if Dawson or his allies learn that I have this? She'd faced intimidation before in her job, but never from local cops with an inside network. Tread carefully, she reminded herself, pocketing the drive. That same night, Alyssa returned to her apartment, double-locked her door, and booted up her laptop. She wanted to see what was on the flash drive, though she dreaded the possibility of finding horror stories. She inserted it and opened the files. Dozens of PDF documents popped up, internal affairs summaries, departmental emails referencing use of force, photos from redacted complaints. She scanned them, eyes widening in alarm. One file recounted an incident in which a young black man, Joel Carter, alleged that Dawson pulled him over for a broken taillight, then dragged him from his car. Carter's complaint was closed with the phrase, "insufficient evidence to proceed." Another file documented an older black woman who claimed Dawson barged into her home without a warrant. Her complaint concluded similarly. On and on it went, a pattern emerging: Dawson's aggression consistently directed at people of color, especially those with fewer resources to fight back. Alyssa's heart hammered. This is systemic. She recognized these cases as the tip of the iceberg. She made notes, pulling out key details, dates, context, the investigators assigned. She saw how time after time, investigators concluded there was no wrongdoing, often citing incomplete body cam footage. Her phone buzzed again, making her jump. The caller ID read unknown. With a wary exhale, she answered. A distorted voice hissed, "You're in over your head. Drop it or pay the price." Her blood ran cold. She steadied her voice. "Who is this? Sergeant Dawson?" Silence, then a click. The line went dead. A chill crawled across Alyssa's skin. It could be Dawson, or one of his lackeys, or someone from the Union. She'd faced threats from criminals before, but receiving an anonymous warning from a figure within law enforcement was more unsettling. She immediately documented the threat, time-stamped it, and resolved to share it with Cassandra and possibly the FBI if it continued. Despite the fear building inside her, she felt an equal surge of righteous fury. They think they can scare me into silence? She thought of Brianna, that frightened teen. She remembered the other stories she'd read about people who didn't have a voice or the legal know how to stand up for themselves. Alyssa set her jaw. Not this time. This ends now. In the midst of the swirling legal drama, Alyssa never forgot Brianna's plight. Her last update had come from a social worker friend at Child Protective Services. Apparently, Brianna was placed in a juvenile shelter temporarily, pending an assessment of her home environment. If her mother was deemed unfit, Brianna could end up in foster care or, worse, return to the very environment she'd fled. Desperate to ensure the teen's voice was heard, Alyssa requested a meeting with Brianna's assigned caseworker. The request was initially met with caution, as some juvenile caseworkers were wary of attorneys. But once the caseworker, Maria Sanchez, learned that Alyssa had been the one trying to protect Brianna, she tentatively agreed to talk. They met in a small office at the CPS building with a battered wooden desk and child-friendly posters lining the walls. Sanchez offered Alyssa a seat, looking exhausted. "Brianna's had a rough time," Sanchez began. "She ran away to escape possible abuse by her mother's boyfriend, but the mother denies everything. The police are leaning toward returning Brianna home. They say she's a troublemaker, and the home is not that bad." Alyssa clenched her fists. They can't just discount her claims. Has Brianna seen a counselor? Was there a medical exam for potential injuries or signs of abuse? "We're trying," Sanchez answered, her voice tinged with frustration. "But everything is moving slowly, and Redwood City PD's stance isn't helping. They're painting you as some meddling outsider. They keep implying that Brianna's story is exaggerated." Alyssa felt a surge of protectiveness. "Brianna has a right to be heard. I'll represent her interests pro bono, if that's allowed. I want to ensure her voice matters in this process." Sanchez's eyes glistened with relief. "I think that's exactly what she needs, a strong advocate. She's had too many doors slammed in her face." The next day, Alyssa met Brianna in the juvenile shelter's visitation room. The teen looked haunted, dark circles under her eyes, posture withdrawn. But a flicker of hope lit her face when she saw Alyssa. I didn't think you'd come," Brianna stammered. Alyssa sat beside her, speaking gently. "I promised I'd help. I'm sorry you've been stuck in here." Brianna's eyes brimmed with tears. "They keep saying I'm lying about my mum's boyfriend. But he hits me, Miss Jenkins. He did worse stuff, too. I can't go back." Alyssa's chest tightened. She reached for Brianna's hand, a fierce resolve settling over her. "I'm going to make sure they hear you, Brianna. You have rights. We'll gather evidence, push for a full investigation. You won't face this alone." Watching the teen's trembling shoulders, Alyssa recalled her own sense of helplessness in that police cruiser. If a grown, well-educated federal attorney could be disregarded so easily, how much more had Brianna been dismissed? The vow Alyssa made that evening was silent but unshakable. "I will protect this child, no matter the cost." A week after Alyssa's release, Redwood City PD arranged a meeting to review Cooper's body cam footage. Cassandra, Alyssa, and a representative from the DA's office, Karen Lowe, gathered in a small conference room in the district attorney's building. In attendance were also Captain Ramirez from Internal Affairs, Sergeant Dawson, and Officer Cooper. Tension thickened the air. They all settled around a large table facing a monitor, and its specialist queued up the video from Cooper's camera. "This is the entire unedited file," he stated, hitting play. The footage began with the cruiser rolling up to the scene on Magnolia Drive. Alyssa's car lights flickered, illuminating Brianna's hunched form. The audio crackled as Cooper stepped out. Dawson's voice boomed in the background, ordering Alyssa and Brianna to the hood of the car. The camera's vantage caught Alyssa calmly stating her name and role. "I'm an attorney with the Point U.S. Attorney's Office." Her voice rang out clearly. Dawson's retort was swift and dismissive. "Hands on the hood now." Alyssa complied, repeating, "I have ID in my pocket." They watched as Cooper advanced on Brianna, who looked terrified. She said she was a runaway. Alyssa's voice intervened gently. "She's in crisis. Please, officers, we need child protective." The screen then showed Dawson grabbing Alyssa's wrist. His harsh voice, "Stop resisting," though the footage clearly showed Alyssa standing still, hand outstretched to show ID. The camera angle caught Dawson tossing her badge aside before slamming her hand on the car. Karen Lowe's expression tightened with every second of footage. Cassandra shot Alyssa a knowing glance, as if to say, "We've got him." Even Captain Ramirez frowned deeply. Cooper shifted uncomfortably in his seat, avoiding Alyssa's gaze. When the video ended, the room sat in dead silence, the last shot frozen on Alyssa's pinned form. Finally, Lowe spoke, voice low. "That is not what was described in the police report." Dawson coughed, turning red. "The camera doesn't capture everything. She was verbally aggressive." "She, Lieutenant," Ramirez interjected. "This video is damning. It clearly shows Miss..." Jenkins calmly explaining who she was. She didn't physically resist. Dawson's eyes darted around, seeking backup. Cooper looked down at his hands, not meeting Dawson's gaze. It seemed the younger officer no longer wanted to shield his partner's conduct, especially now that the truth was laid bare. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Karen Lowe addressed Alyssa and Cassandra. "In light of this video, we have no basis to proceed with criminal charges against Miss Jenkins. The district attorney's office will file a motion to dismiss. And as for the Redwood City PD, the mayor will likely request a broader investigation." Alyssa's spine sagged in relief. Cassandra took a quick breath. "Thank you. This is the correct decision. We will also be exploring civil remedies for the wrongful arrest." Dawson opened his mouth to protest, but the look Ramirez leveled him with was lethal. "Sergeant, you and I will be having a conversation. Officer Cooper, you'll be required to give a full statement to Internal Affairs immediately." Cooper nodded weakly. Alyssa felt the stirrings of triumphant vindication, yet it wasn't purely a personal victory. It was about exposing a pattern that clearly permeated Redwood City PD. She let her gaze drift across the solemn faces. "This is only the first step," she reminded herself silently. Outside the building, a group of reporters had gathered. As soon as Alyssa emerged, cameras whirred to life, capturing the determined set of her features. Cassandra guided her forward, managing the press with calm authority. "Miss Jenkins's charges are being dropped. A further inquiry into potential misconduct is underway," she stated. Alyssa added, "I have faith that the justice system, when presented with evidence, can self-correct." This video speaks for itself. She glanced at the doors behind her. She couldn't help but think of those who never had the benefit of body cam footage to prove their innocence. "I owe it to them to keep pushing," she thought. No victory comes without consequences, and Alyssa soon learned that Dawson's Circle didn't intend to go down quietly. That night, she returned from a late dinner to find her apartment door slightly ajar. The frame splintered. Alarm washed over her. She carefully stepped back and called 911. When police arrived, ironically, from the same department, Alyssa insisted that a neutral forensic team be brought in. She didn't trust Redwood City PD. Officers quickly discovered that a few drawers were rummaged through, some documents scattered, but little else disturbed. A detective, unfamiliar to Alyssa, took her statement. "Any idea who might want to intimidate you?" he asked, brows knitting together. Alyssa hesitated. "I have pending legal action against Sergeant Dawson. I've received anonymous threats." It could be connected. "There are also cases I'm prosecuting as a U.S. attorney that might be relevant." She left it at that, not wanting to point fingers without proof. In the following days, Alyssa felt eyes on her everywhere she went. A black SUV seemed to linger on her street. She'd spot it in her rearview mirror, only to see it vanish when she turned corners. Anxiety gnawed at her edges. Cassandra, concerned for her safety, insisted she file an official complaint with the FBI about harassment and intimidation attempt. But Alyssa refused to cower. She employed a private security firm to install a top-tier alarm system, cameras in her apartment, and a dashcam in her car. She alerted her neighbors to watch for suspicious activity. Fear warred with righteous indignation. She reminded herself of the many plaintiffs who had come forward in past cases, braving threats to stand up for their rights. She was no different. Perhaps she had more resources, but the principle was the same. They picked the wrong person to threaten, she kept telling herself, steeling her resolve. Within a month, formal charges against Sergeant Dawson for false arrest and possible civil rights violations had been drafted by the local district attorney's office, bolstered by the Redwood City Internal Affairs findings and the footage from Officer Cooper's camera. Alyssa's own case was the most visible incident, but the DA's investigators also revisited multiple complaints, thanks to the new evidence from Detective Rooker's flash drive. When the day for Dawson's formal hearing arrived, Redwood City Courthouse was inundated with media. Protesters lined the sidewalks, some demanding police accountability, others bearing signs proclaiming support for law and order. Tension bristled in the air. In the packed courtroom, the judge, a stern man named Timothy O'Leary, asked for opening arguments. The DA's prosecutor began by laying out a series of allegations: excessive force, racial profiling, tampering with evidence, and intimidation of complainants. Dawson's defense attorney attempted to paint Alyssa as an instigator, but the video footage undermined that narrative completely. Alyssa had to testify, recounting the night's events in excruciating detail. She remained stoic under cross-examination, refusing to be rattled by suggestions that she provoked Dawson. She calmly reiterated that she complied fully and identified herself clearly. The footage corroborated every statement. Then came the testimony of other victims. Joel Carter, the young man from the archived complaint, told his story of being roughed up during a traffic stop. Tears glistened in his eyes as he described the shame and fear. Another witness, an older woman, spoke of a no-knock entry into her home by Dawson. On and on, a parade of voices revealed a pattern of abuse that had simmered for years. During each testimony, Alyssa felt a pang of sorrow. She recognized that her position as a federal attorney gave her a platform that these people never enjoyed. Their tears and trembling voices made her vow that no matter the outcome, she would champion them. Dawson's defense tried to question their credibility, dredging up minor criminal records or inconsistencies in statements. But the overarching pattern was too damning to ignore. The tide of public opinion turned sharply against Dawson. Officer Cooper, seeking a deal, testified as well, admitting that he'd followed Dawson's lead, never challenging the older man's aggressive tactics. He expressed regret over Alyssa's arrest, describing how Dawson insisted on cuffing her even though she posed no threat. By the end of the hearing, it was clear Dawson's fortress had cracked irreparably. Judge O'Leary ordered a trial date set, citing probable cause on multiple counts. Dawson was suspended from the force without pay. The press exploded with headlines: Sergeant Dawson exposed, body cam footage reveals disturbing pattern. As Alyssa left the courthouse, she felt a wave of vindication, yet a deeper sense of mission prevailed. If Redwood City PD had protected Dawson for this long, the system itself needed an overhaul. She'd push for that too. I won't settle for his punishment alone. Reform is mandatory. Months of legal battles culminated in a widely watched trial. The Redwood City DA, supported by evidence from Internal Affairs and the newly attentive mayor's office, laid out Dawson's pattern of abuse. National media outlets picked up the story, tying it to broader issues of police reform. Alyssa and Cassandra, while not the lead prosecutors, provided key evidence and testimony. Dawson's defense team tried every trick questioning the authenticity of video, implying conspiracies, but the facts were irrefutable. The turning point came when Cooper's testimony, combined with Rooker's confidential memos, blew apart the last shred of Dawson's credibility. The jury needed just 2 days to reach a verdict: guilty on multiple counts of civil rights violations and assault under color of authority. When the judge read out the guilty verdict, Alyssa allowed herself a measured breath of relief. She caught a glimpse of Dawson's face, ashen, disbelieving. The once confident sergeant was led away in handcuffs, the very symbol of the power he had so long wielded against others. Outside, the crowd erupted, some in cheers, some in anger. Alyssa navigated the press gauntlet, once more offering a succinct statement. This verdict affirms the rule of law. No one is above accountability, especially those who wear a badge and swear to protect us. My hope is that Redwood City will see lasting reforms, ensuring no other citizens endure what so many have suffered. In the days following the verdict, Redwood City's police chief announced a broad overhaul of departmental policies. Body cam protocols were tightened, an independent civilian review board was established, and training on de-escalation was made mandatory. Captain Ramirez claimed that the department was now ready to confront its failings. Some hailed these changes as a sign of progress. Others worried they were merely cosmetic. Only time would tell. Meanwhile, Alyssa continued her day job at the Point Use Attorney's office, tackling a slew of civil rights cases with renewed vigor. But there was one more chapter she couldn't neglect: Brianna's future. Alyssa managed to help secure a stable foster placement for the teenager, ensuring she wouldn't be forced back into the abusive situation she'd fled. Eventually, Brianna's mother lost custody due to proven negligence, and the boyfriend was arrested on separate charges. One sunny afternoon, Alyssa visited Brianna at her new foster home, which had a modest garden and a small basketball hoop in the driveway. The teen looked healthier, less guarded. She greeted Alyssa with a grateful smile. "You did it," Brianna said, voice hushed. "You beat those cops who put us in cuffs." Alyssa returned the smile. "We did it. You stood up for yourself. You told the truth. That matters." They chatted about Brianna's adjustment to foster care, her hopes of finishing school and maybe going to college. Alyssa saw a spark of confidence that had been absent before. She realized that this moment, the quiet success of seeing a life changed, was more meaningful than any dramatic courtroom showdown. As Alyssa drove away, the Redwood City sun glinting off her windshield, she thought about how a single, fateful encounter on Magnolia Drive had spun her life into chaos, yet forged a path to greater accountability. A spark of injustice, she reflected, can become the flame that lights the way to reform. And so, in the hush of that final reflection, she felt not only relief, but a deep, abiding sense of purpose. Her next case, her next stand for justice, awaited. She would face it without fear, because in Redwood City, she had proven that even one person's refusal to back down could bring an entire corrupt structure to its knees. For Alyssa Jenkins, the simple act of pulling over on a lonely street became a turning point that shook an entire police department. Through courage, persistence, and undeniable evidence, she transformed a harrowing ordeal into a call for real accountability. More importantly, she ensured that a vulnerable teenager found the protection she needed. In the end, those who tried to intimidate her paid the price, learning that abuse of authority does not go unchecked forever. This story reminds us that the truth, once revealed, can't be hidden away or silenced. If this narrative inspired you, please like this video to show your support for justice. Share it with friends and family to spark conversations on standing up for what's right. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more stories that honor the power of truth and courage in the face of adversity. Our voices matter. Together, we make them heard.